What we do here is go back.
Hi, and welcome to Mr. Toyama's AP World History. This is Chapter 13, The Expansive Realm of Islam. So, first up we have our introduction. The religion of Islam emerged in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century CE as a result of the vision and teachings of Muhammad. His message attracted a rapidly expanding circle of devout believers known as Muslims. After Muhammad's death, Arab conquerors spread the word of Islam throughout a vast territory extending from the Indus River to the Iberian Peninsula within 1 century. This rapid expansion of Islam contributed to the development of a massive trade and communication network in which goods and ideas spread freely. The realm of Islam became one of the most prosperous and cosmopolitan societies of the post-classical world. This new society was characterized by the following. Number 1. Strong commitment to the monotheistic belief system, resting on the 5 pillars of Islam, first articulated by Muhammad and later elaborated on by scholars and mystics. Number 2. The development of overland and maritime trade and communication routes that facilitated the spread of new crops, trade goods, and ideas from improved techniques in agriculture to the writings of the classical Greek philosophers. And finally, engagement with and sometimes adoption of various cultural traditions encountered by the far-flung realm of its trade contacts, leading to elements of Persian, Indian, Christian, and Greek cultures finding their place into Islamic society and thought. Alright, so before we begin, I'd like to have you guys draw this chart. I've been teaching some of my students the idea that is kind of coming to the new way that you're going to have DBQs and some of your essays that you're going to be writing on your AP exam, and that's the Persia model, and we'll get to that in a sec. But first I want you to draw a box that talks about the early leaders of Islam. The first one is obviously Muhammad, and then we're going to talk about some of the early leaders from this chapter, and that list will continue on as we continue through learning about Islam as it goes down through the centuries. Second, I want you to talk about the early dynasties, or mark up the early dynasties of Islam. Know what it was called, what its leader was, and what it was known for. And there were about 2 probably from this chapter, maybe 3, depends on where you're looking. And again, with the Persia chart, Persia stands for political, economic, religious, social, intellectual, and artistic. As we go through the chapter, I want you to keep an idea on how Islam changed the politics of its areas, the economic systems of its areas, how the religion changed the way that people interacted with one another as a culture. I want you to focus on the social aspects of Islam in terms of how society was organized and what people were expected to do or not do. I want you to think about the intellectual development, some of the ideas and philosophies and some of the greater concepts that come out of Islam and its rise. And finally, the artistic contribution to the world as a result of Islam. So first we have Muhammad and his message. He was born about 570 CE to a merchant family in Mecca. Muhammad was orphaned as a child, and so he was kind of known for kind of spending a lot of time by himself or spending a lot of time kind of just observing things. He eventually will marry a wealthy widow around 595 CE, and he works as a merchant, a trader. His first wife, Khadija. He has a familiarity with paganism, Christianity, and Judaism as practiced in the Arabian Peninsula. One of the things that many historians have commented on is as Muhammad sat around those campfires and as a merchant, he was on what we talked about in the previous chapters with the Silk Road. He was aware of some of the culture, some of the stories, some of the ideas that made up religious thought throughout that little section of the globe that he was in, and as the center of that trade through what we would call now today like Mecca in Saudi Arabia, he was very aware of some of the other cultural and religious traditions that were flowing through, and he would even have some of those adopted into his religious practice as he develops Islam. We then get Muhammad's spiritual transformation. He has visions around 610 CE. From what we understand, Muhammad gets a visit while praying one day in a cave from the Archangel Gabriel. Archangel Gabriel tells him that all the other religions, specifically Christianity and Judaism, are kind of right, but what really God wants is to reset the understanding and teaching to be more focused on one true path, which he would call Islam, which is submission to Allah. And it's a practice of monotheism, or the belief in only one God ruling everything. And this one God's name is Allah. He eventually will take this teaching and attracts followers in Mecca, a city known for its trade routes and also for another large institution that was built in the center of the city called the Kaaba. As Muhammad began to teach, people began to record the revelations received during his visions. It's committed to writing around 650 CE. Muhammad dies around 632 CE, so this is written after he's dead, and people believe that what he said was so important that they should write it down. Up to that time previous, people basically use oral recitation. In the Michael Woods video, it talked about how the original Brahmins used to almost memorize hours and hours of chanting and sounds and just knowing the rhythm of those words and committing them to memory is one of the first ways that the Quran was originally disseminated. But then as time goes on, people began to disagree about what the true teaching was, and to make sure that they have it written down, they decide to record it and make sure that all the words of Muhammad are recorded appropriately inside of the Quran. Then we have what's also a separate book known as the Hadith. It's a tradition of Muhammad's life. Some of the stories of Muhammad, people asking Muhammad questions and his answers. The Quran is known as like the words of God. And so in the speaking of God, God only speaks in what is known as Arabic. So that's the language of God. And it's a complex language. It has many different interpretations of how the words actually form themselves. And so when you talk to people who practice Islam, they would say that Arabic, in the way that the Quran is constructed, is the original text. All texts that are translations into German or English or French or any other language is just a interpretation of the Quran, whereas the original writings and the original words of God actually come in Arabic. And so these people began to study the Quran to understand what God has spoken to Muhammad, and then they also ask questions of like, well, why would Muhammad say this? And so there's no real context to everything as you read it, and so you get the Hadith, which is more stories that relate around the Prophet's way of looking at the world. We get conflict in Mecca. Muhammad's monotheistic teachings are offensive to polytheistic pagans. During this time, Mecca was known as a trading center, but also a spiritual center. Inside of the center of the city, there was this big black box known as the Kaaba. And inside of the Kaaba, at one time before Islam took over, there were probably many statues surrounding the Kaaba and also many statues inside of the Kaaba. And so people would come and they would pay their respects to their god. And while they were there, maybe they would pay homage or honor towards some other gods that they might think are important or valuable. Well, when Muhammad's teachings show up, the people of Mecca, who are pagans, start to see that Muhammad's message is going to attack their money, meaning that the people who normally pay to enter the city, the people that normally pay to pay tribute to at the Kaaba, have some reservations about what Muhammad is saying, and they see that if Muhammad is saying you can worship God pretty much anywhere and pray to God wherever you are, then you don't need to come to Mecca necessarily to have this time with God and this revelation and spiritual experience. And so they see it as an economic threat to existing religious industry. Part of that trade was, again, those taxes. And one of Muhammad's biggest teaching is denunciation of greed as an affront to local aristocracy. You're not going to really like somebody who says that you don't need to pay to worship God if you're one of the people who collects money for people to pay you to worship God. So this starts a conflict between Muhammad and his followers and some of the people who run Mecca at the time. We then get what's known as the Hijra, or the journey or the fleeing. Muhammad flees to Yathrib, or Medina, around 622 CE. He's basically driven out by those aristocratic families that see him as a threat to their economic prosperity. This actually begins what's known as Year Zero in the Muslim calendar. He organizes his followers into a communal society in Medina and actually organizes them around him and around the ideas of Islam. They will eventually become known as the Ummah, or the party. He then sets up a legal and spiritual code for people. Not only is Muhammad concerned with how people are acting and praying and not sinning, but he's also concerned with how people interact with one another on a commerce level, interacting with people on a communal level. And to really support this process, he begins to make some legal rulings and run it like a as a leader or a king would rule a community. Commerce and raids on Meccan caravans for the sake of Ummah. Muhammad then becomes kind of like a marauder or a pirate, and what he does is he raids Meccan caravans on the way to Mecca, severely hurting the economic prosperity of Mecca, and he also conducts commerce separate from Mecca. And if you see on our map over here, we can see that Mecca is fairly close to Medina, and so if you were a trader and you could go to Mecca and possibly have your goods stolen by Muhammad through a raid, or you could go to Medina and just trade with him, many people chose to just trade with Muhammad and make their lives easier. But this eventually will hurt the aristocratic leaders of Mecca, and this will cause kind of a shift in the way that people look at Muhammad and his religion. Muhammad is known as the seal of the prophets, or the final prophet. He accepted the authority of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. The way Muhammad saw it was that with his revelation from Gabriel, he had he received the final explanation of the way that people are supposed to worship God on earth from Gabriel. And so what he needs to do is recognize that Abraham, he started his interaction with God. He was a good dude, and he made sure that the world kind of knew about what we would call Yahweh in the Judeo-Christian worldview. But then he gets to Moses, and Moses brings the law of God down from the mountain on Sinai and explains to the people how they're supposed to live. And then you get Jesus, who kind of codifies or brings together some of the more abstract ideas of Christianity and Judaism. And then Muhammad says that those three were great, it was awesome, but the people kind of messed up and didn't take their teachings in the right direction. And especially Muhammad did not like the idea that Christians were saying that Jesus was God or God himself. Muhammad thought that Jesus was not God, but just a prophet like himself, and was trying to teach people about Allah. And he held in high esteem Hebrew scriptures and the Christian New Testament. He saw those as like the version 1.0 of the true faith of the world. Muhammad's version would be the final, like, after the beta test, and was making people aware of how God exactly wanted to explain how he wanted to be worshipped and interacted with on earth. Muhammad had been entrusted a more complete revelation, that was his idea, one that communicated Allah's plan for the world. Muhammad's return to Mecca. He then launches an attack on Mecca in 630 CE, and then he eventually wins and gets the whole of Mecca to convert to Islam. He then goes around and destroys the pagan sites and replaces them with mosques, but the Kaaba is preserved in honor of importance within Mecca. Inside of the Kaaba, seen here, there's probably some sort of rock from space. There's probably some sort of meteorite or something inside of there that early wanderers and Bedouin saw as valuable to be a place of congregation, because it probably looked very strange inside of this middle of this desert. And as time went on, people began to place religious statues around it, and then eventually they enclosed it. And Muhammad, after destroying the pagan sites, decided that this was kind of a good place to kind of organize people around. And it's approved as a pilgrimage site. A pilgrimage site is where people can go to and congregate and worship together. And Mecca is seen as being still valuable to visit and to continue the commerce, but only after Muhammad has taken over Mecca and made it under the rule of Islam. Muhammad promoted these 5 pillars of Islam. They're the cornerstones of what we would call Islam. To be a good Muslim, you must practice all 5, or at least some point in your life do all 5. And this is the basic 101 version of what it means to be a Muslim. So first, you must say the Shahada, and you have to say it 3 times to really pronounce that you are a Muslim and you have converted. Number 1, you must say that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. And when you say the Shahada, you usually say it in the presence of many people, and you kind of have a big party afterwards. Now is the custom, and kind of like for Christians, there's baptism and like welcoming into the church family. For Muslims, there's the Shahada, which people will say at the time when they come of age, usually to promote that they are now Muslims. Number 2 is Salat, daily prayer 5 times a day facing Mecca. Originally, Muslims prayed towards Jerusalem, but over time, Muhammad approved the site to move towards Mecca. So if you go on your phone, you can find apps that tell you, based on the compass in your phone, which way Mecca is, down to like 1 degree on the compass. And this becomes a very important part of Muslim practice because it actually rotates throughout the day, depending on where you are, depending on where you actually are living on the earth. These times can be as early as 4 or 5 in the morning and as late as 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And you're supposed to say those prayers 5 times a day, and that shows your devotion towards God and remembering His sacrifice for creating you and honoring Him as being the ruler of the universe. Number 3 is fasting during Ramadan or Swam. And what you do is during the month of Ramadan, when the Prophet received his revelation, you're supposed to fast during the day from the hours of sun up to sundown. So, as custom has become, you have like parties at night. So maybe till about 2, 3 or so a.m., you kind of eat and drink and hang out with your family. If you're old enough, you might smoke cigarettes or hookah. And then when it becomes time for Ramadan's fast, you stop. And you're not allowed to do anything, not have water, not have food, and you just wait all day. Now, when Ramadan, the way the Muslim calendar is organized is it's a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar. So sometimes Ramadan falls in the summer, and sometimes Ramadan falls in the winter. If it falls during the winter, during the winter season, it can be better because it's a shorter day time period, meaning that people are able to not have to fast for so long. But during the summer months, students of mine oftentimes talk about how it can be up to 12 or 13 hours of sunlight until their fast can be broken. And usually at the end of every day, you have this feast, and it just kind of rotates. The tradition has become that it rotates amongst families, and we visit different people's houses in our community, and you eat food and breaking your fast until the next day when you fast again. Number 4 is charity or zakat. You were supposed to give 2.5, around that much money, 2.5% of your money to the poor. Usually this is given in terms of handing money through tithing or through donations to your mosque. And this 2.5 number is different from a tithe, which is a tenth of your income that was originally stated by Abraham and kind of kept on through the tradition of the Christian church. And finally, 5, at one time during your life before you die, you must go and make a pilgrimage to Mecca or a Hajj. And when you get there, there's kind of like a touristy feel to it nowadays. What you do is there's certain things you're supposed to do. Like one example is you pray together in these certain tents, and maybe you have meals with people and share stories and conversations. There's also like this big rock in the middle of one of the courtyards, and everyone's supposed to pick up rocks and throw rocks at these pillars, and that's kind of to commemorate one time when Muhammad was like resisting the devil. And there's different things you're supposed to do, like you're supposed to circumvent the Kaaba a certain amount of times, walk around it a couple times. You're also supposed to participate in just different rituals like washing while you're there. And so it becomes like this tourist package to do it all while you're in Mecca. Here's a little video of Muslims engaging in prayer. There's at the beginning a call to prayer, and then there is some time where people are actually praying. I thought that for some of you probably have never seen this, so I thought I'll go ahead and show this right now. So yeah, that's just a little picture of what it looks like during prayer time for Muslims. Next, we get to a term that's a little bit of a controversial term in modern-day society. It's known as jihad. The way that Muhammad pretty much described the original idea of jihad was known as struggle. The text that the Quran kind of communicates within it is that the struggle of the Muslim believer is to believe that God is real and that He has ordained the universe, and your job is to struggle against the things of this world that will tear you away from the right path of following God. That includes things like drinking, polyamorous sex, meaning sex with multiple partners that aren't your wives or husbands, having really horrible thoughts, murdering people without murdering people in general, but also being an unrighteous person. And so you're supposed to struggle against vice. You're also supposed to struggle against ignorance of Islam. So when people say they don't know much about Islam, your jihad is supposed to reason with them, explain to them what Muhammad said, and try and convert them and let them know about the revelation Muhammad had from the Archangel Gabriel. But then jihad also probably means something along the lines of holy war. And the way that the Quran kind of dictates this is it's not supposed to be against everyone all the time, especially not against Christians and Jews. What you're supposed to do if you are following Islam and committing jihad specifically as a holy war, you're supposed to commit holy war against unbelievers who threaten Islam. So you're not supposed to be the first ones to attack, but Muhammad, being a warrior who led raids and fought as a warrior, saw himself as needing to prevent God's words from being corrupted or destroyed as they had, in his view, with Judaism and Christianity. If you believe that God had spoken to Muhammad, and you believe that this is the true revelation, that God, the creator of the universe and everything, has given you the true message of what he wants to have happen, and people are trying to stop you or hurt you or even kill you, your job as a righteous warrior of God is to kill them and stop them from hurting you and your family and your community and your ummah. And so what your job to do is to go out and defend Islam even with your very life. This has become controversial because there are many terrorist groups in modern day that say that jihad is holy war against all people who do not fall under the banner of Islam, including Jews and Christians, which we'll talk about a little later. We then get from the Quran, the Islamic law called the Sharia. It's a codification of Islamic law. So as Muhammad spoke in the Hadith and some other texts that Islam has within it, people start to take together some of the ideas that Muhammad had and try to apply it to law. This is going to show up again and again, where religion affects the way that people interact as a community and a social group. Not only are you supposed to not drink alcohol as a good Muslim, that's a religious duty, and it would be a sin to drink alcohol as a Muslim. Sharia dictates that those who drink alcohol should be punished by the government or by the police structure within a community to support those who maybe have gone astray. Again, it goes back to, if you believe God is the creator of the universe, you're actually helping people by punishing them. With little kids, if you let little kids wander around your house, and let's say the stove is on and the little kid wants to touch it, and let's say there's boiling water on the stove and they want to pull the boiling water on top of them, you would not be a good parent if you just watch them do it. Your job is to stop them and punish them for trying to hurt themselves. So that's where the Sharia comes in. It's based on the Quran and the Hadith and logical schools of analysis when you look at some of the writings and teachings of Muhammad. It extends beyond ritual law to all areas of human activity, everything from how you're supposed to interact with one another, what women should do, what men should do. A lot of the things that Islam has comes from Sharia, not necessarily from directly the text that is within the Quran. We then get what's known as the Caliph, or the leader. When Muhammad dies, there's no clear successor to Muhammad. He didn't say who was supposed to be in charge after him. So what ends up happening is the Ummah becomes led by Abu Bakr. He was the first Muslim outside of the Prophet's original family to convert to Islam. He's chosen to lead as Caliph by the community. Now, this might cause some controversy if you are somebody who says, well, why did God choose Muhammad? Maybe there was something special about Muhammad, and Muhammad never had any sons to take over. So who should be in charge? Well, if you're the part of the community, you'd say, oh, well, whoever was the best Muslim. Just like how we vote for president, we don't necessarily go from the basis of heredity, meaning that it doesn't pass from father to son. With our presidential election, we pick the best candidate, hopefully, to lead our country. So Abu Bakr becomes the next leader. He leads a war against villagers who abandoned Islam after Muhammad's death. Many people started to fall away after Muhammad died, believing that, well, since he's dead, maybe God isn't interacting with us or cares about us that much. And Abu Bakr did a good job of bringing many of those people back. We then get the expansion of Islam. It has highly successful attacks on the Byzantine and Sassanid territories, but there's difficulty governing rapidly expanding territory. The one cornerstone of Islam is that it's not based on clan group or Bedouin group. It's designed around the idea that all of humanity is brothers and sisters of Allah, of one another, and all under the banner of Allah. So as these groups interact with other groups, they're starting to tell one another, hey, we all are brothers and sisters, and so we should get along. But if you were living, for example, in the Byzantine or Sassanid territories, you might say, yeah, that's nice, but I'm still going to have allegiances towards the Byzantine or Sassanid area that I live in. And it becomes highly problematic in governing these big territories. Here's the expansion of Islam between 632 and 733 CE. You can see Islam in purple up to 632. Then we see it grow around 661. Then in 733, it's in pink. And then we get the Abbasid Caliphate, which is in this outlined purple-pink that grows over most of what we'd call the Middle East today and northwestern India. And then we have the Byzantine Empire, which is right around Turkey and centered around Constantinople with parts of Rome. We get the Lombard Kingdom, which was taken over after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Frankish Kingdom in green, kind of north in the French area. So Islam grows out from Mecca to encompass a large area of the globe during this time. The Shia. So as I talked about before, as Abu Bakr is chosen as caliph or leader, there were some within the community that thought that this is not the way that they want to have the community run. Muhammad dies, Abu Bakr is chosen, and there's disagreement over how caliphs should be chosen at one after another. Ali, who was a cousin and son-in-law to Muhammad, was passed over or was not allowed to be the leader in favor of Abu Bakr by the Ummah. But he then eventually is serving as caliph from 656 to 661 CE and is assassinated along with most of his followers. The remaining followers organize into a separate party called the Shia, and the traditionalists are known as the Sunni. So there are two groups within Islam. Both groups see themselves as the true expression of Islam. Many times they do get along, but in some countries they are completely Shia. In some countries they are completely Sunni, and it's a weird thing. In Christianity there are different denominations. There's Baptists and Calvinists and Pentecostalists and Armenianists and all these different kind of groups who kind of identify as believing in certain sets of texts or believing in a certain ideal system of how Christianity should be practiced. This is similar in Islam, where they're arguing over who should have succeeded Muhammad after his death. Shia and Sunni eventually will have divergent paths on practice and some other laws and some restrictions that they believe in, and to this day, Shia and Sunni don't always get along. We then get to the Umayyad dynasty. They're from the Meccan merchant class. They brought stability to the Islamic community, and they have their capital in Damascus, Syria. They're associated with an Arab military aristocracy. So that Meccan merchant class that Muhammad originally takes over, they start to see themselves as their own kind of group, and they are the governmental structure separate from the Ummah, even though many of them would have seen themselves as belonging to the Ummah or the party of God. They would have seen themselves as being the governmental rulers of the government structure that encompasses Islam. Here's the Umayyad dynasty, 661 to 750. This is the size it was at its largest. You can see some of the things that I showed before in the map. It takes over a large section of North Africa, the Middle East, parts of Western Eurasia, and goes all the way up into Spain and almost reaches, and the Iberian Peninsula, and almost reaches Central Europe. They had a policy in Islam toward conquered peoples. There was favoritism of Arab military rulers, causes discontent. As the people are incorporated into Islam, people start to say, well, why are the Arab peoples, especially the military rulers, the ones who are seen as getting the good jobs, seen as getting the good positions within the government, and there was limited social mobility for non-Arab Muslims. So maybe you would have been one of those people who lived in the surrounding areas around Mecca, or even farther out in like North Africa, for example. And when you convert to Islam, you think, yes, that sounds great. We're brothers and sisters in Islam. We're all equal. God loves us all, and I'm going to do the Islam thing like Muhammad taught. But then you start to see that it's not the case in the way the government works, that you are not equal, and that the people who are from the Arab regions are seen as being favored in military promotions or in even your job. Maybe people like Arabs come in and they're now promoted ahead of you. There's kind of discontent in this community, especially the Ummah, and their discontent grows. Well, to kind of offset this, there is this thing called a head tax, or jizya, for non-Muslims, for the people known as the al-Kitab, people of the book. Muhammad didn't really hate or dislike Christians and Jews. One of the things he was very adamant about was that Abraham, Moses, Jesus, all prophets, all awesome followers of God, they just had either their words corrupted or they didn't explain it well enough to the people. And so the Al-Kitab, or people of the book, meaning the Old Testament or the New Testament or the Torah as it's known to the Jews, they needed to be protected. And they didn't have to convert. And Islam is not supposed to be about violence and forcing people to do what you want. Islam is supposed to be about submission within yourself to what Allah says. So if you're a Christian and you live in a conquered area by Muslims, you would just have to pay a jizya to be allowed to live within that area. You pay your jizya, you can continue to go to church, and when bad people show up to kill you from outside of our community, we will protect you as long as you pay your jizya. This has differing approaches as time went on. Sometimes people who paid the jizya and the al-Kitab were protected. Sometimes the Muslims just use it as a way to raise funds and then kind of turn their backs whenever bad things happened. The Umayyad luxurious living causes further decline in moral authority. If you are a Muslim, you're supposed to resist greed. You're supposed to resist audacious living, because we're all supposed to be one and we're supposed to take care of each other, and as the family of God, brothers and sisters, we're not supposed to live really odd, like crazy blowing money kind of lives. And so the Umayyads are seen by those conquered peoples as being ostentatious towards the way they spend money. We then get the Abbasid Dynasty, 750 to 1258 CE. Abu al-Abbas is a Sunni Arab. He allies with the Shia and non-Arab Muslims, and he seizes control of Persia and Mesopotamia. He defeats the Umayyad army in 750 CE, and he invites the Umayyads to a banquet and then massacres them. Kind of hints of the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones. What is interesting about the Abbasid dynasty is that Abu al-Abbas understands that there is this discontent within the Ummah, and that as a Sunni Arab, he can find allies within any place that are willing to side with him, especially non-Arab Muslims who are already growing discontent with feeling that the way Islam is being practiced, especially in the government, is not reflecting what Muhammad would have wanted, knowing that we are all brothers and sisters in Allah. Here's the Abbasid dynasty. Its size at its largest, around 850. You can see it's a little bit smaller, and it doesn't encompass the Iberian Peninsula or parts of northwestern Africa. The nature of the Abbasid dynasty was diverse nature of administration, not exclusively Arab. This corrected some of the previous problems that many Muslims that were non-Arab had with the Umayyad dynasty. The military was competent, but not bent on imperial expansion. When we think back to Rome, one of the cornerstones of the Roman army was the growth and expansion of Roman territories. With the Abbasid dynasty, they learned a little bit from some of those mistakes and understanding that maybe in expansion for the purposes of just growing your empire is not always the best move, especially when you could make treaties, you could have trade with people and let them continue to do their thing and you live with your thing. And remember back a couple slides, as Islam expanded and the empires of Islam expanded, it became very hard to keep everybody organized and in line with some of the rulings. They were content to administer the empire they inherited, and they now call what that area that they rule Dar al-Islam, or the House of Islam. Basically, any country or area that practices Islam as its major religion. The growth through military activity of autonomous Islamic forces. Sometimes there was growth, but basically it was by rulers and generals who tried to make names for themselves by gaining more territory and bringing their newly captured territory into the Abbasid dynasty. The Abbasid administration had Persian influence. It had a court at Baghdad. There was an influence of Islamic scholars. There was a big press towards having Islamic scholars learn and memorize and write down the Quran and make sure that it's disseminated to the people, but also they were interested in collecting ideas from other places and other areas of the globe. The ulama and the Qadis sought to develop policy based on the Quran and Sharia. These are governmental bureaucrats who organize themselves as scholars to help to make good economic policy, good social policy, and domestic policy for the community that was based on the Quran and Sharia. For example, in the United States, we have governmental leaders, specifically like senators and representatives in the House of Representatives. They oftentimes make laws based on the way they interpret their religion, or they base laws on what people ought to do that might be good or moral actions. So, for example, if you pay your taxes, you would probably pay a lot of taxes depending on how much money you make. But if you give money to charity, a religious or moral good, then the government rewards you by lessening your tax burden that you owe the government because you gave away some of your money to charity. This is kind of similar to what the ulama and the Qadis did by using religion to help them create good policies for their government. We then get to Caliph Harun al-Rashid, 786 to 809 CE. He's the high point of the Abbasid dynasty, seen there sitting down with like a scepter in his hand, talking to the guy that looks like Gandalf. Baghdad is the center of commerce, and he promotes great cultural activity within his borders. He's seen as like a really good ruler for the people, and this is him actually meeting with a group that has come from Charlemagne, which we'll talk about a little later. The Abbasid decline. There's a civil war between the sons of Harun al-Rashid, and provincial governors assert regional independence. Back to one of those big truths of history. Dissenting sects and heretical movements pop up. Dissenting sects basically saying, we don't think that you guys are practicing Islam the way Muhammad wanted, so we're going to do our own thing. And then there's heretical movements that say that what Muhammad was really talking about was completely different than the way that people are teaching it, and so people start to splinter off into different religious smaller groups. The Abbasid caliphs become puppets of the Persian nobility as the Persians kind of reassert a little bit of power in the governmental structure. The Abbasid caliphs pretty much just do whatever the Persians want them to do, and later the Seljuk Turks influence them, with the Sultan being the real power behind the throne back in India. Economy of the early Islamic world. Spread of food and industrial crops, trade routes from India to Spain. Part of this area of the world is the Silk Road. And as the Silk Road is moving through those areas, people are interacting with goods and ideas on that road that is being supported by the governmental administrations of the Silk Road. As there's food moving and industrial crops, these trade routes from India to Spain gain a lot of money by having protection from the local area and the local leaders who are willing to protect those who are trading within their area. Western diet adapts to wide variety. The Western diet that we would know as Western, which would be like Europe and the Middle East starts to change as people start to interact with more crops, new crops adapt to different growing seasons, and actual agricultural sciences developed. Before, people pretty much just knew about their crops that kind of grew naturally within their area. Like, for example, in Asia, we talked about how rice is naturally occurring in those areas after the expansion of the first peoples around the globe. But over time, as trading happens, people are able to move rice to new areas like India and some parts of like the Middle East. People are able to figure out how to get water to these crops. They figure out how to promote the growth within the soil, how to do crop rotation, how to do some better skills to make the crops grow better as a result of using science and logic and reason to figure out what's going on with the crops. Cotton and paper industries develop, paper coming from China, cotton being woven into textiles for people to wear, and major cities emerge. There is the formation of a hemispheric trading zone, historical precedent of Arabic trade. Dar al-Islam encompasses Silk Roads. Hemispheres are sections of the globe. As Arabs were already traders, they were already used to trading between different towns and different areas of their specific areas of growth. But as Dar al-Islam grows, we're now interacting with North Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, parts of Europe, the Mediterranean. People are starting to interact with one another, and this starts to create a larger network within those circles that we would traditionally call different areas of the globe. At one point, it was so efficient that ice could be exported from Syria to Egypt during the summer in the 10th century without refrigeration. This hemispheric trading zone allowed for traders to have organization at a level that is only been seen in the 20th century with like people like the UPS and the post office moving goods at very high speeds in very low amounts of time. There are camel caravans. Camels are amazingly good for trade in this area because camels don't need lots of water. If you think about as a caravan what you need to carry with you, you have to make some sacrifices. I oftentimes think back to the Oregon Trail, the video game that you played on the computer. Many of you probably love that game, but at the very beginning, most of the time you had to choose. You had to choose whether you were going to bring lots of food or you were going to bring lots of goods. And depending on those choices would depend on whether or not you could make it to the end of the Oregon Trail. The same goes for traders during this time. If you choose horses, yes, you can move your goods very fast, and you could carry lots of goods maybe on carts. But are the horses going to need lots of water? And in places like the desert, there isn't a lot of water for you and your horses. So every bit of water that you carry, every gallon you carry, is one less something you can't bring to trade to make money. So camels become very efficient because they're not usually needing lots of water. They can go long periods without needing to drink out of rivers or oases. And the camels become very good pack animals for trading goods during this time. They also have maritime trade. Arabs were some of the first to get on boats and trade up and down the coast, really harnessing the monsoon seasons on western India, but also moving it into the Mediterranean. There's banking and trade that develops. The scale of trade causes banks to develop. If you think about trade, let's say you carry tons of goods from Mecca to North Africa. Well, even though you're under, for example, the Umayyad protection, when you get to where you're going to trade all your goods away and get lots of money. You don't want to carry lots of money for many, many miles. And so banks develop, and what they do is they get receipts and tickets and what's known as checks showing that goods have been received in one place and that when the traders return to where they had come from, they can cash in those checks or socks to receive money in their hometown and start their business up again. And it's also easier. If you had many camels and you carried all these goods out to North Africa, you would then trade away all these heavy goods for maybe a couple bags of silver, right? Or gold. Well, going back, you still have to carry lots of silver and gold. Whereas if you get to the end and you're just carrying a check, you're carrying maybe a handful of papers that prove that you did trade some goods and that this network of banks that are all owned by one person should give you the money when you return. And this is seen as a great invention in the history of finances and economic progress. There's a uniformity of Islamic law throughout Dar al-Islam, and it promotes trade. Basically, because everyone started to learn Arabic, there's an ease and accessibility between traders in discussing numbers and discussing the amounts and types of goods. There's also this general sense that if you were somebody living in North Africa and you saw a caravan wandering around, you saw that they were Muslims, you probably wouldn't attack them because you knew, hey, God is watching and God is watching them, so we should be good Muslims and take care of one another. And it also, as that whole thing of brothers and sisters of Allah, or brothers and sisters of one another under Allah, we should remember to take care of one another. And joint ventures were common, people coming together with their monies. Basically, it's where, let's say you and I don't have enough money to be traders, but I have some amount of money and you have the knowledge of how to get somewhere, so I'll put up the money, you drive the caravan, and when you come back, we split the profits. Al-Andalus, or Islamic Spain. Muslim Berber conquerors from North Africa take Spain in the early 8th century. They ally with the Umayyads and refuse to recognize the Abbasid dynasty. They form their own caliphate and basically separate themselves off in that little Iberian Peninsula. There were tensions between them, but they saw interrelationship, especially with trade. And being in close proximity, especially on the Iberian Peninsula with Christian Europe, they saw a kinship with those Muslims back in the Middle East. One of the long-term ramifications of Dar al-Islam expanding into the Iberian Peninsula as part of Al-Andalus is in Spanish, whenever there is a prefix to a word that's al, or al, like Alhambra, or I don't have another one, Alhambra, that it comes from the Arabic influence on the Spanish language during this time. Changing status of women. The Quran improves the status of women. Contrary to what many people see, these ideas of Islam bring us together. When you think about a family, brothers and sisters are supposed to be equal in the eyes of their parents. And if Allah is the God above us, and not necessarily our father, but at least the ruler of the universe, he should see us all as the same. And so women should not be subjugated to men, but should be seen as equals to men, at least in terms of the brother and sisteriness of being under Islam. It also specifically outlawed female infanticide. Sadly, during this time, with the patriarchy firmly established in many of these cultures that we've studied, women were not seen as valuable. So if you were the father and your wife had a daughter, you actually did have a choice of whether or not you would just leave the daughter out to die, or even just drown it in a river, throw it off a cliff. The idea was that women, and little girls especially, were just seen as a burden that you would need to find dowries for and need to marry off, and just one more mouth to feed. Also, the Quran says that brides, not husbands, are to claim dowries. Originally, the dowry was a gift to the husband from the wife's family to improve the status and the hopes of their future relationship, but originally this was taken by husbands to do whatever they want. With the establishment of Islam and the dissemination of the Quran, women are actually supposed to claim their dowries and use the money as they see fit to support their families. Yet, this didn't always work out. Male dominance is persevered. There's patrilineal descent, meaning that the way that titles or the way that land was given was pretty much only through males. Polygamy is permitted, meaning that you as a male, if you were male, can marry multiple wives, but polyandry is forbidden, meaning you can't just sleep around with whoever you want. So in the Quran, there is an injunction that says that you can marry as many wives as you'd like, pretty much, but you're supposed to treat them all the same. And it's seen as being, during this time, women who were not married had a very difficult time in the world. They had no one to protect them, they had no one to provide for them, and it was very rare that women had jobs as we would understand them today. Yet under the Quran, it says that women are supposed to be treated equal, and so Muhammad actually had multiple wives, and he saw this as a blessing because he was able to say, look, I'm taking care of those who don't have anybody, and there are more women than there are men, and since I'm a rich man, I should take care of those in need. The veil is adopted from ancient Mesopotamian practice. Here is the veil. Women and men in the Quran are supposed to cover themselves. They're not supposed to just bare their skin everywhere. They're not supposed to look like strippers. in a strip club, what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to be modest before God. This ancient Mesopotamian practice regarded that women should cover themselves up completely. Today, it's controversial within Islam whether women need to wear the veil or whether men need to control themselves. If we're all supposed to be equal, don't men have an equal burden to not hurt or attack women for not wearing veils? And this isn't really a cornerstone of Islam in terms of Muhammad saying that the veil needs to be worn, but there was an injunction against not being modest in the presence of the opposite sex. There's a formation of an Islamic cultural tradition. Islamic values start. There's uniformity of Islamic law in Dar al-Islam as the cultures interacted and Islam grew. Under the House of Islam, people start to say, oh, okay, we need to have laws that kind of cover all of these areas, and people kind of adopt them as they receive Islam and some of the people who practice Islam both in religion and also in law. There are establishment of madrasas or schools that just teach about Islam and the Quran, and that's where you would learn Arabic if you weren't naturally learning Arabic as a part of your culture. There's the importance of the Hajj. Originally, it seemed very difficult for people to travel very far away. If you live, for example, in Al-Andalus and the Iberian Peninsula, you would have a very difficult time. You'd have to go from basically Spain through northern Africa all the way down to Mecca. Through Dar al-Islam, though, there are networks that are set up for people to actually pay for people to transport them from Spain through North Africa safely so they can do their Hajj and then return back when they're all done before they die. There are then Sufi missionaries. They practice asceticism and mysticism. They're really into kind of not a practical version of Islam where you just kind of check the boxes of the 5 pillars and be a good person. They kind of see God as being mysterious, similar in the vein of like Buddhism, where there's a lot of unknown and a lot of kind of poetry and kind of language things. There's some tension within Orthodox Islamic theologians because for the Orthodox Islamic theologians, they see that Islam is supposed to be like the order of the universe, and using logic and reason, God obviously would tell Muhammad what the most important things to do are, and then we just do those and we're good. But within the Sufis, they start to say, well, maybe God wants us to keep expanding on this and thinking more deeply about it. And Muhammad was like the basic course, and now we need to get to advanced stuff and kind of become more like one with God. It gains wide popularity during this time. Oh, this picture. The people that are Sufis, many of them do what's called whirling. They dress like these big like dress kind of looking things, and they spin around and they chant, and this is supposed to get them into a heightened meditative style state, and they're supposed to kind of connect with Allah in a more higher level than those who just pray. Next we have Al-Ghazali from 1058 to 1111. He's a major Sufi thinker from Persia. He argues that there is an impossibility of intellectual apprehension of Allah. Many Muslims like to argue that Muhammad's codification or explanation of Islam makes it simple. Allah wants some certain things, specifically the 5 pillars and maybe some good living, like living like a righteous person, and you check the boxes and that's what Allah asks of you. Al-Ghazali actually argued that Allah is too impossible to understand. He's too big and magnanimous and amazing and incomprehensible. And so what you need to do instead is have devotion, absolute devotion towards Allah, and look for mystical ecstasy or good vibes and do some kind of rituals that help you to find joy within Allah as being valuable to your practice of Islam. We have cultural influences on Islam. In Persia, they take the administration and governance from Persia and its literature. In India, they take mathematics, science, and medicine and get the Hindi numbers, which will eventually become Arabic numbers, which, like, for example, 0, 1, 2, 3, the numbers you think in your head when I say those numbers, that's what the numbers look like. In Greece, they take philosophy, especially Aristotle, and they get Ibn Rashid and Averroes, 1126 to 1198. Talk about him another time. When you have finished studying this chapter, you should be able to do the following. Number 1, outline the key aspects of the life of Muhammad, his message, his migration to Medina, and the establishment of Islam in Arabia. Number 2, explain and discuss the early caliphs and the establishment of the Umayyad dynasty. Number 3, identify and discuss important features of the Abbasid dynasty. Number 4, explain and discuss the economic and social development of the early Islamic world. Number 5, outline the formation of the Islamic Hemispheric trading zone. Number 6, explain the changing status of women within Islamic society. Number 7, outline the formation of an Islamic cultural tradition. And number 8, compare and contrast the cultural traditions of Islam, Persia, India, and Greece. Writing assignment, short response, 5 to 8 sentences. Number 1, Islam spread more rapidly than any other major world religion. Why do you think it was this way? What aspects of the religion made it appealing? How was the cultural climate conducive to the rapid expansion of Islam? Number 2, I would draw a 5-bubble Venn diagram. Compare and contrast the beliefs, including the treatment of women, of the major religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And number 3, finally, the book states that Dar al-Islam became probably the most prosperous and cosmopolitan society of the post-classical world. What does this statement mean? What evidence is there for this statement? Do you agree or disagree? As always, it has been great talking to you. I look forward to visiting with you guys on Chapter 14. Now it's time to pull out your book and time to reread. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
What we do here is go back.